"I don't need you to cook," the weathered drifter growled at the trembling black woman wiping tables in the dust-choked saloon, but his dismissive words caught in his throat when sunlight revealed the purple bruises wrapping around her thick arms. The town saw her as nothing, too fat, too dark, too quiet to matter. They expected her to scrub floors until her hands bled, then disappear into the desert like so many before her. But when the sharp-eyed stranger noticed what others ignored, their fates intertwined. He carried secrets that could destroy men, while she possessed something that could reshape the entire territory. Neither understood that her bruises were just the beginning, that powerful men would kill to keep buried what she was about to discover. Would the stranger's protection be enough when she learned the truth that made her the most dangerous person in 100 miles? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Redemption Creek as Jasper Hardy guided his horse down the dusty main street. His weathered face showed the wear of too many towns and too many disappointments. The former Pinkerton detective had been riding for 3 days straight, following reports of suspicious land deals in the territory. Murphy's saloon stood at the heart of town like a rotten tooth. Hardy dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. The wooden steps creaked under his boots as he pushed through the batwing doors. Inside, the air hung thick with tobacco smoke and stale whiskey. A handful of men hunched over cards at corner tables. Behind the bar, bottles lined crooked shelves like broken promises. Cassie Lee moved between the tables with practiced invisibility. Her large frame carried the weight of endless days scrubbing floors and serving drinks to men who looked through her. She wiped down surfaces that would be dirty again within minutes. A cowpoke at the nearest table flicked a piece of jerky at her feet. She bent to pick it up without complaint. Another man laughed and tossed his cards down. Hardy ordered whiskey from the bartender and settled onto a stool. He studied the room with trained eyes, cataloging faces and noting the subtle power dynamics that every establishment possessed. Cassie approached his table with careful steps. Sweat beaded on her dark skin despite her steady movements. "You want something hot to eat, mister? Got beef stew in the back." Hardy barely glanced up from his drink. "I don't need you to cook." The dismissal rolled off his tongue automatically. He had grown accustomed to keeping people at distance. But as Cassie turned away, afternoon sunlight streaming through the window caught her forearm. Purple bruises wrapped around her wrist like ugly jewelry. Fresh ones, dark and angry, layered over faded yellow marks that spoke of regular visits from violent hands. Hardy's detective instincts stirred. He had seen enough abuse to recognize the patterns. These weren't accidental bumps or kitchen burns. Someone was using this woman as a punching bag. The saloon doors swung open with authority. Sheriff Nathaniel Kane filled the doorway, his badge catching the light. Everything in the room shifted. Conversations dropped to whispers. Card games paused mid-deal. Kane was a man who understood power and wielded it like a club. His boots struck the floor with deliberate force as he crossed to the bar. The bartender already had a bottle waiting. "Afternoon, Sheriff," the bartender said. His voice carried the careful respect of a man who knew which side his bread was buttered on. Kane's eyes swept the room and landed on Cassie. She had frozen in place, holding her cleaning rag like a shield. "You move awful slow today, girl." Cassie's shoulders tensed. She resumed wiping tables with increased urgency. Kane knocked back his drink and slammed the glass down hard enough to make every man in the room jump. He pulled out a leather pouch and began counting coins onto the bar. "Collection day," he announced to the room. The bartender nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, Sheriff. Right on schedule." Kane pocketed most of the coins but left a few scattered on the bar. His message was clear. He decided what constituted fair payment in this town. Hardy watched the exchange with growing interest. Small-town corruption wasn't unusual, but Kane operated with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. As Kane headed for the door, he deliberately bumped into Cassie. She stumbled but caught herself against a table. Kane didn't apologize or acknowledge the contact. He simply continued walking. But Hardy saw him squeeze Cassie's wrist as he passed, saw her wince and bite back a cry. saw Kane's satisfied smile as he released his grip. The sheriff pushed through the doors and mounted his horse. Within minutes, the saloon returned to its previous rhythm, as if nothing had happened. Hardy finished his whiskey and left payment on the bar. Outside, the heat hit him like a physical blow. He needed information about this town and its power structure. The boarding house sat 3 buildings down from the saloon. A hand-painted sign read, Ma Sawyer's Rooms. Hardy climbed the porch steps and knocked. Martha Sawyer answered the door. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her apron showed the stains of honest work. But her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who missed very little. "You need a room, stranger?" "Yes, ma'am. Name's Hardy." Martha studied him with the thoroughness of a woman who had learned to read men quickly and accurately. 50 cents a night, meals extra, no drinking, fighting, or entertaining ladies. Hardy paid for 3 nights and accepted the key she offered. "Quiet town you got here," he said. Martha's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Quiet enough, long as folks mind their own business and don't ask too many questions." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Hardy thanked her and headed upstairs to his room. Through his window, he could see the saloon across the street. Cassie emerged from the back door carrying a bucket of dirty water. She moved carefully, favoring her left side. Hardy had come to Redemption Creek following reports of fraudulent land deals. But watching Cassie pour out the wash water, he realized this investigation might uncover more than financial crimes. The woman was trapped in a cycle of abuse that went far beyond simple assault. Someone was keeping her powerless for a reason. Hardy spent 2 days observing Cassie's routine. She arrived at the saloon before dawn and left well after sunset. Her movements were careful and practiced, like someone who had learned to make herself invisible. On the 3rd evening, he approached her as she swept the saloon's back porch. "You ever learned to read?" Cassie looked up sharply. Her eyes darted toward the street, checking for witnesses. "Why you asking?" "Might be useful. World's full of information if you know how to find it." She resumed, sweeping with increased intensity. "Don't got time for learning nothing." Hardy pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket. "Take 5 minutes, won't hurt nobody." Cassie hesitated. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't charity or pity. It sounded more like a transaction between equals. She set down her broom and perched on the edge of a crate. Hardy opened the newspaper and pointed to simple words. She traced the letters with her finger, sounding out syllables. Her progress was remarkable. Within minutes, she was reading short sentences. Her mind absorbed information like parched earth soaking up rain. "You catch on quick," Hardy said. "My daddy used to say I had a remembering mind. Could hear something once and keep it forever." "What happened to your daddy?" Cassie's expression closed off. "He died when I was small. Don't remember much else." Hardy folded the newspaper. "Same time tomorrow?" She nodded and disappeared into the saloon. Their evening lessons became routine. Cassie's reading skills improved dramatically. She devoured every word on every page Hardy brought her. After a week, he arrived with a stack of old newspapers he'd found in Martha's boarding house. "These go back 5 years," he said. "Lots of town history in them." Cassie flipped through the pages eagerly. Legal notices, land sales, birth announcements, death records, the written chronicle of Redemption Creek's recent past. She paused on a page near the back. Her finger traced a legal notice slowly. "What's this word?" Hardy leaned closer. "Inheritance. Inheritance." She pronounced each syllable carefully. "What's it mean?" "When someone dies, they leave property to family members. Land, money, belongings." Cassie continued reading the notice. Her fingers stopped moving. Her breathing changed. "This say, Lee?" Hardy examined the text. The legal notice was dated 3 years earlier. It announced an unclaimed land grant inheritance for the heirs of Sergeant Marcus Lee, Buffalo soldier, deceased. Says any surviving family members have 7 years to claim the property. After that, it reverts to territorial control. Cassie's hands began to shake. "My daddy's name was Marcus Lee." Hardy felt his detective instincts sharpen. "You sure about that?" "Mama told me before she died. Said he was a soldier. Said he fought in the war. Hardy studied the notice more carefully. The land grant was substantial. 640 acres of prime grazing land just outside town, enough to make someone very wealthy. If this is your inheritance, you'd be one of the richest landowners in the territory. Cassie stared at the paper like it might vanish. That can't be right. I don't own nothing. Never have. When did your father die? Mama said I was 3 years old. That'd make it 18 years ago. Hardy calculated quickly. The inheritance notice was only 3 years old. Someone had been sitting on this information for 15 years. We need to talk to Martha. She's been in this town longer than anyone. They found Martha in her kitchen, kneading bread dough. She looked up as they entered, immediately sensing the tension in the room. Hardy spread the newspaper on her table. You know anything about this? Martha wiped her hands on her apron and read the notice. Her face went pale. Sweet Lord above, I wondered when this would surface. You knew about it? Cassie's voice was barely a whisper. Martha disappeared into her bedroom. She returned carrying a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. Your daddy left this with me before he died. Made me promise to keep it safe until you were old enough to understand. Inside the box were official documents, military discharge papers, a deed to 640 acres, and a letter addressed to Cassie in careful handwriting. Hardy read the letter aloud. Marcus Lee had earned the land grant through military service. He'd hidden the inheritance because he feared what would happen to his daughter if powerful men learned about it. He knew someone would try to take it from you, Martha explained. Said to wait until you were strong enough to fight for what's yours. Cassie held her father's discharge papers with trembling hands. The man she barely remembered had been a decorated soldier who'd served with honor. This is really mine? Every acre, Hardy confirmed. And according to territorial law, you've got 4 more years to claim it. But who's been paying taxes on it all this time? Hardy and Martha exchanged glances. The same thought had occurred to both of them. Someone's been collecting money on land they don't own, Hardy said. That's federal fraud. Cassie stood up straighter. For the first time since Hardy had known her, she looked directly into his eyes. What do I got to do to claim it? File papers at the county courthouse. Present these documents to a territorial judge. And Sheriff Kane? Hardy's expression darkened. Kane's been bleeding this town dry for years. If he finds out you're about to become the wealthiest person in Redemption Creek, he won't go down without a fight. Cassie folded her father's letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then we better be ready for one. Hardy and Cassie rode to the county courthouse at dawn. The building sat 20 miles east of Redemption Creek, an imposing structure of red brick and territorial authority. Cassie carried her father's documents in a leather satchel Martha had given her. She sat straighter in the saddle than Hardy had ever seen. Knowledge of her inheritance had transformed something fundamental in her bearing. You remember what we practiced? Hardy asked. Present the deed first, then the military papers, then the birth certificate proving I'm Marcus Lee's daughter. And if they give you trouble? Territorial Statute 47 says military land grants can't be disputed without federal oversight. Hardy smiled. Cassie had absorbed legal knowledge like a sponge absorbing water. Her mind retained every detail he'd taught her about property law. They dismounted at the courthouse steps. Inside, clerks shuffled papers behind tall windows. The smell of ink and dust filled the air. A thin man with wire spectacles approached them. His eyes swept over Cassie with undisguised disdain. You folks lost. We're here to file an inheritance claim, Hardy said. What kind of claim? Cassie stepped forward. Military land grant inheritance. 640 acres granted to Sergeant Marcus Lee, Buffalo Soldier Regiment. The clerk's eyebrows raised. You got documentation for that? Cassie opened her satchel and laid the papers on the counter with deliberate precision. Her movements were calm and confident. The clerk examined the documents. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to concern. These look authentic, he muttered. They are authentic, Cassie said. I'm Cassie Lee, Marcus Lee's daughter. I'm claiming what's rightfully mine. This'll take some time to process. Maybe you should come back next week." Hardy leaned against the counter. "Territorial law says inheritance claims must be processed within 24 hours of filing." The clerk's face reddened. "I know what the law says." "Then you know we'll wait." A commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Horses thundered up to the courthouse steps. Sheriff Kane burst through the doors with 2 deputies flanking him. His eyes found Cassie immediately. "Step away from that counter, girl." Cassie didn't move. "I'm conducting legal business." Kane strode forward and snatched the papers from the clerk's hands. He scanned them quickly, his face darkening with each line. "These documents are forgeries." "No, sir, they're not." Cassie's voice remained steady. "That's my father's military discharge. That's the original land grant deed. That's my birth certificate from the territorial registrar." Kane pulled out a folded document from his coat. "I got a lien on that property, filed 2 years ago for unpaid taxes." Hardy examined Kane's paperwork. The legal language was technical, but the intent was clear. Kane had claimed the land reverted to territorial control due to non-payment of taxes. "Who authorized this lien?" Hardy asked. "Territorial tax assessor, all legal and proper." "Except the rightful owner never received notice of the tax assessment," Cassie said. "Territorial Statute 23 requires personal notification before any lien can be filed." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You've been getting schooled in law, have you?" "I've been learning to read. Amazing what you can discover when you know how." The courthouse clerk shifted nervously between them. He'd never seen anyone stand up to Kane like this, especially not a woman Kane had been abusing for years. "According to these documents," Cassie continued, "my inheritance claim takes precedence over any tax lien. Federal military grants can't be seized for territorial taxes without due process." Kane's hand moved toward his gun. "You calling me a liar?" Hardy stepped between them. "Nobody's calling anybody anything. We're following proper legal procedure." "I know who you are, stranger. Been asking questions around town, making people nervous. Just trying to understand how things work in Redemption Creek." Kane smiled coldly. "Things work the way I say they work." Cassie moved around Hardy to face Kane directly. "Not anymore, they don't." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the courthouse understood that something fundamental had just shifted. Kane studied Cassie with new eyes. This wasn't the same frightened woman he'd been terrorizing for years. This version of Cassie Lee stood her ground and quoted legal statutes like a territorial lawyer. "You got 30 days to clear out of town," Kane said. "Both of you." "And if we don't?" Hardy asked. Kane's smile turned predatory. "Redemption Creek's got lots of dangers. Rattlesnakes, flash floods, accidental fires." The threat was barely veiled. Kane was promising violence if they didn't abandon the inheritance claim. Cassie gathered her documents and placed them back in her satchel. "File the claim," she told the clerk. "Ma'am, I'm not sure that's wise right now." "File it." Her voice carried absolute authority. The clerk looked between Cassie and Kane, sweat beading on his forehead. Kane leaned across the counter. "You file that claim, there's going to be consequences." The clerk's hand shook as he reached for his stamp. The sound of it hitting the documents echoed through the courthouse like a gunshot. "Claim filed," he whispered. Kane's face went dark red. He pointed at Cassie with a trembling finger. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Cassie met his gaze without flinching. "No, sir. The biggest mistake was letting you think you could steal from me forever." Kane and his deputies stormed out of the courthouse. Their horses' hooves struck sparks from the stone steps as they rode hard toward Redemption Creek. Hardy and Cassie followed at a more measured pace. Both knew Kane wouldn't accept defeat quietly. "You ready for what comes next?" Hardy asked. Cassie adjusted her grip on the reins. "I've been ready my whole life, just didn't know it yet." They returned to Redemption Creek to find Murphy's saloon engulfed in flames. Orange tongues licked at the wooden walls while black smoke billowed into the evening sky. Half the town had gathered to watch the blaze consume the building. Kane stood among the crowd, his face a mask of false concern. Terrible accident. Lamp must have gotten knocked over. Hardy pulled Cassie away from the heat. The message was clear. Kane was demonstrating what happened to people who challenged his authority. Martha appeared at Cassie's elbow. "Your things are safe. I moved them to the boarding house before the fire started. You knew this would happen? I've lived in this town long enough to read the signs." The flames reached the saloon's second floor. Cassie's small room above the bar disappeared in a shower of sparks. Everything she'd owned for the past 5 years turned to ash within minutes. But instead of despair, Cassie felt something unexpected. Relief. The fire had severed her last connection to servitude. "Where will you stay?" Martha asked. "With me," Hardy said. "I got a room at your place." Kane's deputies moved through the crowd, asking questions about the fire's origin. Their investigation was perfunctory at best. No one would contradict the official story of an accidental lamp fire. Hardy studied the burn pattern on the saloon's exterior walls. The flames had started in multiple locations simultaneously. Someone had used accelerant to ensure the building burned completely. "Professional job," he told Cassie quietly. "You think Kane's done this before?" "I think Kane's been running this town like his personal kingdom for years." They walked back to Martha's boarding house as the saloon collapsed in on itself. Other residents of Redemption Creek watched from their windows, but kept their opinions to themselves. In Hardy's room, Cassie spread her father's documents on the small table. By lamplight, she studied every detail of the land grant deed. 640 acres, she read aloud. Bounded by Willow Creek to the north, Territorial Road to the south. Hardy produced a territorial map from his saddlebags. "Show me where that puts your property." Cassie traced the boundaries with her finger. Her land encompassed the best grazing territory for 50 miles around. Water rights to Willow Creek made it even more valuable. "No wonder Kane wants it," she said. Hardy pointed to several marks on the map. "These are recent cattle brands registered with the territory. Someone's been running livestock on your land for years. Stealing from me. Stealing from you." They spent the night documenting evidence of Kane's illegal activities. Hardy's investigation skills combined with Cassie's remarkable memory created a detailed picture of systematic fraud. The next morning brought visitors to Martha's boarding house. 3 families knocked on the door before sunrise, asking to speak with Cassie privately. Tom Chen ran the general store. His wife Sarah did seamstress work from their home. They had arrived in Redemption Creek 10 years earlier with dreams of prosperity. "We heard about your inheritance claim," Tom said carefully. "Word travels fast in a small town," Cassie replied. "Kane told us our store lease was invalid last year. Made us pay triple rent or get out." Sarah Chen pulled out a folded paper. "But we kept this. Original agreement signed by the previous sheriff." Cassie examined the document. The lease was clearly legitimate, signed by proper authorities and witnessed by territorial officials. "Kane had no right to change your terms," she said. The second family was the Hendersons, who operated a small farm outside town. Kane had claimed their water rights were illegal and forced them to pay for access to the creek that ran through their own property. The third visitor was Elena Rodriguez, whose husband had been the town's doctor before Kane ran him out for treating patients who couldn't pay Kane's medical fees. "He's been bleeding everyone dry," Elena explained, "making up laws that don't exist." Cassie listened to each story with growing anger. Kane hadn't just been abusing her. He'd been terrorizing the entire community for years. Why didn't anyone fight back? "He's got the badge," Tom said. "Who's going to believe us over the sheriff?" Hardy had been taking notes during each conversation. His questions were precise and methodical, like a lawyer building a case. "When did Kane first arrive in Redemption Creek?" he asked. "About 8 years ago," Martha answered. "Previous sheriff died in an accident." Kane showed up with territorial papers appointing him as replacement. "Anyone ever verify those papers?" Silence answered his question. Hardy's expression grew grim. "I need to send some telegrams." He rode to the territorial office while Cassie continued gathering testimony from other townspeople. By afternoon, a clear pattern had emerged. Kane had been systematically stealing from every family in Redemption Creek. False tax assessments, invalid lease modifications, fraudulent fee structures. He'd turned law enforcement into a criminal enterprise. Hardy returned with disturbing news. Kane's appointment papers are forgeries. Real sheriff was murdered 8 years ago, not killed in an accident. So he's not actually sheriff? He's a con man with a badge. Been impersonating a law officer for nearly a decade. Cassie felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. That's why he kept me down. If I learned to read, I might discover the truth about my inheritance. And if I claimed what's mine, other people might start asking questions. Exactly. You were the biggest threat to his operation. Martha appeared with a basket of food. You two better eat something. Kane's been asking questions about who's been visiting the boarding house. Through the window, they could see Kane's deputies stationed at various points around town. Redemption Creek was starting to feel like a prison. How long before he makes his next move? Cassie asked. Hardy checked his pocket watch. Soon. Men like Kane don't wait when they feel cornered. As if summoned by his words. Smoke began rising from the direction of Martha's barn. Martha's barn burned faster than the saloon had. The flames consumed hay and wooden beams with hungry efficiency. By the time they reached the backyard, nothing could be saved. Kane emerged from behind the burning structure with his deputies. His smile was cold and triumphant. Another terrible accident. Seems like fire's been following you folks around. Hardy stepped protectively in front of Cassie and Martha. Convenient timing. Bad luck comes in waves sometimes. Maybe it's time you considered moving on. We're not going anywhere, Cassie said. Kane's expression hardened. That's so? Well, accidents have a way of spreading. Boarding house is mighty old. Dry wood burns real easy. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Kane was escalating beyond property destruction. He was threatening lives. Martha clutched Cassie's arm. Maybe we should listen to him. No. Cassie's voice carried absolute certainty. Running away won't solve nothing. Just gives him license to keep stealing from everyone. Hardy watched Kane's deputies position themselves around the yard. They were preparing for confrontation, hands resting on their weapons. You got something you want to say to me, stranger? Kane asked. Just wondering how a fake sheriff keeps his job for 8 years. Kane went still. The casual threat in his posture shifted to genuine danger. What did you just call me? I sent telegrams to the territorial capital, checked your credentials. Marcus Kane died in a Denver jail 3 years before you showed up here. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Kane's deputies looked confused, uncertain whether they should react to this revelation. You've been impersonating a dead man, Hardy continued. Real question is what your actual name might be. Kane's hand moved toward his gun. You're playing a dangerous game, stranger. Name's not stranger. It's Deputy U.S. Marshal Jasper Hardy, and you're under arrest for federal crimes. Cassie stared at Hardy in shock. Everything about him suddenly made sense. His knowledge of legal procedures, his investigative techniques, his calm authority in dangerous situations. Kane laughed bitterly. Federal Marshal? You got any proof of that? Hardy pulled back his coat to reveal a silver badge pinned inside the lining. Been investigating land fraud across the territory for 6 months. Your operation here is just part of something much bigger. One of Kane's deputies stepped backward. Boss? If he's really a federal marshal, he ain't nothing but a drifter with a fake badge. Badge is real, Hardy said. So is the federal warrant I'm carrying for your arrest. Kane drew his weapon in one smooth motion. His deputies followed suit, but their movements lacked conviction. Federal warrant don't mean nothing if you're dead. Cassie moved between the two men before anyone could fire. Stop this right now. Get out of the way, girl. No, sir, I will not. She stood directly in Kane's line of fire, her body shielding Hardy. You want to shoot a federal marshal? You'll have to shoot me first. Kane's gun wavered. Killing a lawman was one thing. Murdering an unarmed woman in front of witnesses crossed a line that even his corrupt deputies might not stomach. This ain't your fight anymore, Kane said. It's been my fight since the day you put your hands on me, since you stole my inheritance, since you made me believe I was nothing. Cassie's voice grew stronger with each word. The transformation Hardy had watched develop over the past weeks reached its culmination in this moment. "I know who I am now," she continued. "I know what I'm worth. And I know you got no power over me anymore." Kane's deputies exchanged uncertain glances. They'd never seen anyone stand up to their boss like this. Never seen him look uncertain or afraid. "My daddy earned that land through military service," Cassie said. "He fought for this country and this territory. You stolen from his memory every day you collected taxes on property that belongs to me." She stepped closer to Kane, forcing him to either shoot or back down. "But it ain't just about my land. It's about Tom Chen's store lease, Elena Rodriguez's medical fees, the Henderson family's water rights. You've been stealing from this whole town." Martha found her courage and moved to stand beside Cassie. "She's right, Kane. We all know what you've been doing." Tom Chen appeared from around the corner of the boarding house, then Sarah Chen, then the Hendersons. One by one, the families Cassie had interviewed that morning emerged from hiding places around the property. Kane found himself surrounded by the very people he'd been terrorizing for years. His deputies looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "Federal backup is riding in from the territorial capital," Hardy announced. "Should be here within the hour." "You're lying." "Telegraph office keeps records. Check for yourself." Kane's gun hand began to shake. Everything he'd built in Redemption Creek was collapsing around him. 8 years, he said. 8 years I kept order in this town." "You kept fear," Cassie replied. "That ain't the same thing as order." The sound of approaching horses echoed from the main street. Kane's head snapped toward the sound, hope flickering in his eyes. But the riders wore federal uniforms, not territorial badges. Deputy marshals with proper credentials and legal authority. Kane's shoulders slumped in defeat. His weapon lowered toward the ground. "It's over," Hardy said quietly. Kane looked at Cassie one final time. "You think winning makes you safe? Think federal law protects you from everything? I think the truth protects me, and I ain't afraid of it anymore." The federal marshals dismounted and approached with practiced efficiency. Kane surrendered his weapon without resistance. As they led him away in shackles, he called back to Cassie. "Land ain't going to be easy to hold. Lot of powerful people got interests in this territory." "Then they can deal with me legal and proper," Cassie replied. "I ain't hiding no more." The federal hearing took place in Redemption Creek's town square 3 days later. Judge William Harrison had ridden in from the territorial capital with a court stenographer and legal documents that would reshape the community's future. Tables and chairs were arranged under canvas awnings to protect against the desert sun. The entire population of Redemption Creek gathered to witness justice being administered properly for the first time in 8 years. Cassie sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a new dress Martha had sewn for the occasion. Her father's military documents were arranged neatly before her. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had discovered her true worth. Hardy testified first, presenting evidence of the land fraud investigation that had brought him to Redemption Creek. His official federal reports documented similar schemes across 3 territories. Kane operated under at least 4 different identities, Hardy told the court. His real name appears to be Samuel Garrett, wanted for theft and impersonation in Colorado and New Mexico. Judge Harrison reviewed the falsified sheriff credentials. "How long was this deception maintained?" 8 years, Your Honor. During that time, he collected illegal taxes on property belonging to Miss Lee and several other families. Cassie was called to present her inheritance claim. She stood before the judge with steady composure, no longer the frightened woman who had once scrubbed saloon floors. "These documents prove my father earned this land through military service," she said. 640 acres with water rights, legally granted by the federal government. Judge Harrison examined each paper carefully. The deed, military discharge, and birth records were all authentic and properly recorded. "The inheritance claim is valid and binding," he announced. "Miss Lee is the rightful owner of the disputed property." Kane, shackled and flanked by federal marshals, was given opportunity to respond. His lawyer had abandoned him after learning the extent of the fraud charges. "That land's been generating tax revenue for the territory for years," Kane argued. "You can't just hand it over to some girl who never paid a penny toward its upkeep." "The land belongs to Miss Lee by federal grant," Judge Harrison replied. "Any taxes collected were illegal seizures that must be repaid with interest. The financial restitution alone would make Cassie one of the wealthiest individuals in the Arizona Territory. 8 years of stolen taxes plus penalties amounted to several $1,000s. Tom Chen testified about the illegal lease modifications that had nearly bankrupted his general store. Elena Rodriguez described the fraudulent medical fees that had driven her husband from town. The Henderson family presented evidence of water rights theft. Each testimony painted a picture of systematic corruption that had impoverished the entire community while enriching Kane and his associates. This court finds Samuel Garrett, alias Marcus Kane, guilty of federal impersonation, grand theft, and conspiracy to defraud, Judge Harrison announced. Sentence is 10 years in territorial prison plus full restitution to victims. Kane was led away to a prison wagon. His deputies, who had cooperated with the investigation, received lighter sentences and immediate banishment from the territory. The judge turned to address the gathered townspeople. This court hereby appoints Deputy Marshal Hardy as interim sheriff until proper elections can be held. Hardy accepted the temporary badge but made his intentions clear. "I'll serve until you folks can choose your own lawman. Democracy works best when communities make their own decisions." The legal proceedings concluded with property restorations and financial settlements. Tom Chen's lease was validated. The Henderson family regained their water rights. Elena Rodriguez received compensation that would allow her husband to return and reopen his medical practice. But the most dramatic transformation belonged to Cassie Lee. 6 months later, Hardy rode out to inspect the thriving ranch Cassie had built on her inherited land. Cattle grazed in green pastures watered by Willow Creek. A large house stood where once there had been only empty grassland. Cassie emerged from a wooden schoolhouse she had constructed near the main road. Children of all backgrounds were learning to read using the same techniques Hardy had taught her. "How many students now?" Hardy asked. 16. Tom Chen's children, the Rodriguez girls, 3 Henderson boys, and families from the surrounding ranches. She had hired Elena Rodriguez as the school's first teacher and Martha as its administrator. The education was free for any child whose family couldn't afford to pay. "Kane was right about one thing," Cassie said. "Powerful people did try to challenge my land claim." "What happened?" "They sent lawyers instead of gunmen. I sent better lawyers back." Cassie had used her restitution money to hire the best legal representation in the territory. Every challenge to her property rights had been defeated in federal court. "Turns out reading is even more powerful than I thought," she continued. Hardy dismounted and tied his horse to the schoolhouse rail. The badge on his chest was permanent now. The townspeople had elected him sheriff by unanimous vote. "You hungry?" Cassie asked. "I was just about to start supper." Hardy smiled at the familiar offer. But everything about this moment was different from their first encounter in Murphy's saloon. "I'd be honored if you would." They walked toward the house together as evening settled over the ranch. Cassie's land stretched to the horizon in every direction, a testament to dignity reclaimed and justice served. The schoolhouse bell rang in the distance, calling children home to families who no longer lived in fear. Redemption Creek had earned its name at last. In the kitchen, Cassie prepared a meal while Hardy reviewed territorial law updates. Their partnership had evolved from teacher and student to equals working toward the same goals. "What's next for you?" Hardy asked. "Thinking about running for territorial council." "Someone needs to make sure what happened here doesn't happen anywhere else." Hardy nodded approvingly. "You'd have my vote." Outside, the sun set over land that belonged to its rightful owner. Inside, 2 people who had discovered their true purposes shared a meal and planned for a future built on justice and truth.